ONTHI, British Council present. Teaching English to visually impaired learners. Session 1. Understanding your visual impaired learners.
Welcome everybody to this course in which we are going to talk and learn about visually impaired students in foreign language classes. I hope you find it interesting and useful. However, before we start with the whole session, I would like to make a brief overview or summary about the main points and aspects we're going to discuss throughout this first hour together. In this case, we're going to understand the teaching possibilities when working with visually impaired students, how important is to know different characteristics and how they affect to the learning process. I will explain this trying to help you to identify the visual disability and those characteristics. And we will talk about some negative misconceptions that are very general in our society related to how visually impaired students are able to learn or not foreign language. So, as I said, I hope you find it interesting, and let's start with the session. We're going to start this session talking about different statements that I would like you to comment if you think they are true or false. So I will recommend you now to stop the recording if you need to think a couple of seconds, and then I will explain if they are true or false. Okay, so here you've got the first one. It says visually impaired students can't achieve the same level of competence in a second language, in a foreign language, as a non-impaired learner. Deaf-blind students will never be able to communicate in another language, and it is important not to ask too many details to the family or the student about the disability in order not to offend them. So, as I say, take your time, have a couple of seconds before you comment, and I will explain them in the following slides.
Introduction.
We start this session talking about the importance of achieving different languages and how languages are the most important tool we have among societies, cultures, and people to communicate between each other. So the problem here is that there are a lot of people, or it is often discussed, whether an impaired student is able to achieve that foreign language. We are going to focus here on visually impaired learners, but this thought is normally spread in the idea of impaired people not being able to achieving other abilities as the rest of the people. So here I would like to explain how a language is achieved. And basically, we work with two different skills, the receptive and the productive ones. And we first acquire the receptive ones, and once this acquisition happens, we are able to produce. So the order would be we first listen, then we speak, we first read, then we are able to write. Okay, once we have these linguistic skills acquired, the combination of the four of them will give us what should be our main goal when teaching, which is the communicative competence. So we need to combine and we need to work with the four different skills in order to get that competence in our students. As I was saying at the beginning, learning a language is the best way to communicate, so we shouldn't doubt about the possibility of a visually impaired student learning this ability, this language. Apart from this, languages give us an incredible it's an incredible way to understand other cultures, and it's a right for everybody to have that possibility to learn and communicate among different cultures and people. This is something very related to the British Council's EDI policy, which you can read there, which says that the work is based on building meaningful, enduring, and respectful relationships across different cultures. We cannot do this without a strong commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. So we cannot doubt about the possibility of include everybody in the learning process of a foreign language. As I was saying, everybody should be included in foreign language classes, as it gives us the opportunity to know and relate to other people. And the same process that I was explaining in the learning of a language, we can generalize it to the learning of a foreign language. So if nobody doubts about a visually impaired student learning their own mother tongue, nobody should doubt about that student having the ability and the skill to be able to learn a foreign language, because the same process occurs when learning a foreign language than the mother tongue. However, there are some important aspects that we need to take into account when we work with students and the learning of a foreign language. The age is really important. Our brain doesn't work the same. The connections we are able to do are not the same when we are younger than when we are adults. So it will affect the how fast or how quick and how significantly we can learn a language. We need to talk here as well about the non-natural learning context. Sometimes schools, classrooms are not a very natural context. In this case, the most natural way we present and we introduce the language, the best is going for the best it is to learn that language. Okay, so we need to try to have relaxing classrooms and not make our students feel frustrated in this process of learning a language. We need to pay attention as well about the differences between a foreign language and the mother tongue of the student. This is even more palpable when we work with adults, because they tend to make relations between one language and the other, and that relations and those comparisons sometimes make it difficult, the learning. And we cannot forget about the learner's motivation. They are visually impaired students, of course, but they are sometimes teenagers, or they are adults with problems, or they are children who don't like the English in this case. So we need our students to be motivated, and this is something we can achieve doing different activities and changing the way of lessons we do. Okay, but we cannot forget that this is something that it's out of our control. We can improve it, but we cannot control it. Okay, they have an impairment, but they are also people with different situations and characteristics, and we shouldn't forget that. Well, we have learned the importance of knowing how the languages are acquired. We have learned that the same process occurs when we work with mother tongue and a foreign language. We have learned as well about the importance of knowing different aspects of our students. So we arrive now to the point of what can a teacher do? It's maybe the first time you face a classroom with a student suffering from visual impairment. And well, the first thing we need to do here is something that I have already said, which is to evaluate the level of competence in their own language. We cannot ask for more than what they already have in their mother tongue. They can achieve anything for sure, but anything that it is achieved in their mother tongue. Okay, so it's important to know the basic concepts or the levels that are acquired in their own language in order for us to know what type of activities or what level we should ask. Then we need to be conscious and positive. Visually impaired students can learn language, as we have seen, but they will need time and they will need adaptation of the material. Okay, this adaptation we will see how to adapt material in session 3. But well, this adaptation takes time to the teacher and also to the student. The student with visual impairment needs more time to get into the activity. Okay, so the 3 main things that we can do when having a student in our classroom is to evaluate what they know in their mother tongue, to be positive about the process because we know they have learned a mother tongue, to adapt material, and I would recommend to take advantage of this experience in this situation and making them work in groups. We have been talking about the importance of achieving communicative competence in order to relate to other people and to other cultures. So we cannot avoid this situation. We should give them the opportunity to work in groups and not in isolation, okay? Because if they work individually, they are not going to be able to work in that communicative competence, and it shouldn't. It's not fair for them, okay? They can work in groups, and we need to explain to the rest of the group as well how to work with a visually impaired student. But this is something very positive for the whole group. Once we have explained and understood that it occurs the same process when learning a foreign language than when learning our mother tongue, we can comment the first statement that I shared with you at the beginning of the session. And I invited you to think about the possibility of visually impaired learners achieving the same level of competence of foreign language as a non-impaired learner. And it's false, okay? They can achieve the same level of competence as non-impaired learners do. But what we have to evaluate is their mother tongue level, so we can ask them to achieve up to that level. So the thing is that we cannot ask for more than what they have achieved in their mother tongue, but they can achieve communicative competence.
Students' needs associated with each type of visual impaired and deaf blindness.
We start now a more practical and more specific part in this session related to different disabilities and how each one may affect with its specific characteristics the learning process in our visually impaired students. Well, before starting with more specific disabilities and talking about how these impairments affect, depending on its characteristic, affect the learning process, I would like you to explain some more general concepts that will help you understand the differences between the disabilities. But first of all, it's important to define what a visual impairment is. And in this case, is the difficulties that a person have in the process of seeing. Depending on that level, of those levels of difficulties, we can talk from totally blind or to low vision disability. Here you've got different concepts, general concepts, that will help to understand the differences between these disabilities. So depending on how these concepts are affected, the student will have one disability or another. In this case, we're going to talk about the most general concepts, in which we can find the visual acuity, which is the ability of the eye to define details; visual field, which is the portion of a space that is perceived simultaneously without making movements. This is something very common in our students. Visually impaired students tend to move the head in order to accommodate the portion of the eye that allows them to see properly. Then we've got contrast sensitivity, which helps you to distinguish the shape from the background. Color vision, this ability helps you to distinguish the different grading of colors. Then we've got ocular function, which are the involuntary control of the eye. As I was talking in the previous one, there are a lot of visually impaired people, students, who cannot control how their eyes move. And well, as you can imagine, this is something very uncomfortable when they try to read or focus on one specific object. We've got as well the concept of accommodation, which is the ability to focus on different distances. And finally, we've got the ocular adaptation, which is the ability to function with very different lighting levels. With more or less light, your eye works the same. However, there are people who don't have this ability of adaptation. Now we are able to at least try to identify with the information that we've got how the different disabilities affect the learning process and what are the best recommendations depending on these differences that we find in these visual disabilities. But first, I would like you to make a brief game in which I want you to think which visual disability is connected to each image. You've got three impairments there. That is, the first one is low vision acuity, the second one is central scotoma, and the third one is peripheral vision loss. These are three very typical visual impairments that we can find in our students, and we've got three different images that show how these people who suffer from these different visual disabilities normally see. So can you please try to match the name and the image? I recommend you to stop the recording, think, because I'm going to tell you now the answer. Okay, so the first one would be central scotoma. As you can see, there is a space in the central in the center of the image in which our students wouldn't be able to focus. Letter B would be low vision acuity. This is very important because we have explained what visual impairment is, but I haven't mentioned that all these difficulties appear even with ocular correction. You may think that you have a visual disability because if you take off your glasses, you probably see something similar to what you can see in letter B. But the truth is that our students will see like this even with the glasses. And finally, in letter C, we've got peripheral vision loss, which is somehow the opposite of central scotoma because the vision loss is in the borders of the focus, we can say. Well, so once we have discussed about the most typical visual disabilities and we have seen some examples of how our students are able to see and to access the documents, I would like to focus now on one of them, which is in this case the central scotoma. As I have already explained, in this visual disability, people cannot see basically the center of the image or the center of their focus. So imagine how difficult it would be to access to a reading text or to an image they have to describe in a speaking activity if they cannot see the whole image and the central part of it. In this case, I would like to give you some recommendations related to this specific disability. However, don't forget that in the document that you've got in your platform, you will find some more recommendation of the most general and typical visual disabilities that you can find in teaching situations. So related to central scotoma, I will allow our students to get close to the document or to get close to the screen or to the interactive board if they need it. In this case, they will find the whole information. Another important option would be to give them documents without glare. They need contrast and intense colors. However, the glare is not something that benefits or eases the process of learning. And another important option here is that I will give them, if we're working with words or with a text, a paragraph, I will give them a greater separation between characters. It's not only the enlargement of the image, it's to give them more separation between the words so they don't miss so much information in that central part in which they can't access, they don't have access to the information. So as I said, this last part is, I think it's one of the most important thing to remember, as the greater separation will give them the opportunity to miss less information, and to as well they will give them the opportunity not to move so much the head in order to find and focus the reading or the word or the information they are looking for or they are following. Okay. Well, now we arrive to a very specific disability related to visual impairments, which is deaf blindness. Okay, you might have the possibility of working with a deaf blind student, and in order to to know how to work with them, it's important to know first what deaf blindness means. Here, I think it's important that I take a couple of seconds to explain that there is very common misconception about this concept, in which people believe or think that if you are deafblind, you can't see and you can't hear anything. The truth is that there are different levels of these difficulties, and depending on these levels, we will be able to see more or to hear more. And depending as well on this level, we will find even students, deafblind learners, who are not even aware of the real world because they cannot get the information through the hearing or through the sight. In any of the cases. Okay, so the truth is that if we have a deaf blind learner in our class, will mean that this person, this student, can have the ability to communicate in different levels, but he or she will have the capacity for sure to communicate. So here you've got some recommendations to work, an important aspect to know when we teach deafblind students. In this case, I have always said during this session the importance of setting realistic goals. We cannot ask our students for more than in their mother tongue, and in this situation it's even more important to take this into account. Apart from this, we can have the possibility to work with a deaf-blind student who works through language sign. In this case, there will be an assistant teacher who will mediate and communicate between the teacher and the student, okay? So it's not necessary for you to know this language as sign language. However, it's important and relevant to understand how this language works, because these structures they create are totally different to the structures we create. So it can happen the situation that we have a deaf-blind student who commits the same mistakes once and another, and well, we need to take our time, talk with the assistant teacher, and check if that mistake is due to the language, the sign language, or it's something this student can learn, but he or she is not learning properly. I'm going to give you an example that I hope you find useful and practical. If I have a student who writes a sentence like, I, an apple, won't, grammatically, I understand that it's not correct. However, I would ask to the assistant teacher if this is the normal way structures are made in sign language in order to know how this student is understanding and producing the language. Nonetheless, in my case, I would totally be very happy if a student, a deaf-blind student, creates that sentence, because my commitment as a teacher is to make this student communicatively competent, and I can understand what he wants through this sentence. I know that he wants an apple. So the important thing here is to find the balance between what we know is correct and what we know that we want our students to create with language. So as I said, if we have a student with sign language as a code, it's not important for you to know this language, but it's important to know the differences we can find related to our own language. So with the previous explanation about the apple in that sentence, I hope you understand why I have said here that this sentence, the second statement that I presented to you at the beginning of the session, is false. I was asking if deaf-blind students will ever be able to communicate in another language, and of course they can communicate themselves. This communicative process and the communication itself can be different to what we are used to. However, they can totally be communicatively competent.
The teacher's perspective.
We start now a new point of this session, which is what can a teacher do when they face a class with a visually impaired student for the first time. So let's continue, and I hope you find it interesting. So yes, it's really normal to feel overwhelmed when we face this situation for the first time. So the first thing we need to do is try to relax and get this opportunity as an incredible challenge to show our different teaching strategies and a way of learning new things, okay? So once we have the information that we're going to have a visually impaired student in our class, the first thing we should do is to set which is our main goal when teaching. We cannot forget that communicative competence is what we want in our students. And if we have this in our mind, the process of teaching will be easier, or at least is what my experience have told me. We need to understand that our students' disabilities are different, but we also need to understand that non-impaired students have also necessities. So it's important to find a balance between the adaptations process and the ordinary materials, because every student is different and we have to get everybody into the class. Okay, so here you've got some tips that I hope you find interesting. And well, the first one is that it's important to know our students' needs, as I have said. I always recommend the coordination between other teachers and families. They give you a lot of information and you can learn a lot from your students in different contexts if you get the information from different contexts. It's really important, and this is something I will explain in detail in session 3, but it's really relevant to assess and check the accessibility, not only about not only on the materials we use, but also on the class. We cannot forget about our space in the classroom, and it needs to be accessible as well. As I said, we need to know which is the main goal when teaching, but also we need to be very conscious and aware of which is the main goal of each activity. You're going to see once you start adapting materials that there is a lot of extra information that our visually impaired students don't need to do the activity. So it's really important to understand the activity and understand what we want our students to do, because this will ease a lot the process of adaptation. And finally, and probably my favorite tip, is that you're having the incredible experience of facing a different reality in your class. So I really believe this is a great opportunity to make the rest of the group part of different processes and to work with different transverse topics such as equality or cooperation.
Working with families.
And finally, we arrived to the last part of this session, which is the importance of working with families. However, I would like to explain that the information you're going to find in this session, in this section, it's also it can be also generalized to the working with adults. So let's start. But first, let's comment the last statement of the 3 I already presented. In this case, I wanted you to think about the importance of working with families, and well, it's false. We need to communicate and we need to relate with our students' families and our students to get as much information as possible. Of course, we need to be respectful, and there are some personal details that maybe the families or the students don't want to talk about, and we need to accept that. But we should have the opportunity to communicate and establish a good relation in order to have an interchange of information and make this learning process the most positive one. We arrived to the last part of this session, which is working with families, as I have already introduced to you. However, before I start, I would like to explain that this information is, it can be understood or explained as well related to working with adults. Okay. Well, families are part of our teaching and the learning process of our students. Families need to be informed. They have actually the right to be informed, but they also have the obligation to inform teachers about any detail or about any difficulty or any aspect they consider important. So I really believe this connection, this relation should be maintained during the whole year, and different meetings need to be done, even more if we are working with an impaired student, as it's in the case with visual impaired ones. Okay, so I always recommend to have some preliminary meetings at the beginning of the year with the family, and it's even greater to have this preliminary meeting with the family and the student if it's possible. In this meeting, you will feel relaxed, or at least I hope you feel that, because you will understand how the child works. The family will explain you how other teachers have worked with this kid, and you will get some positive or negative strategies that have worked with these students, so you will know how to face this new challenge or this new situation, teaching situation, the first day of class. So you will have information in advance that will be very beneficial for you. However, I also recommend you to have these meetings throughout the whole year, as well, we need to check constantly, the accessibility and different aspects related to our visually impaired student. And here you've got some questions that might be interesting to ask to families when working with visually impaired students. The first one would be if the child is happy in our class. It's a very simple question, but it will give you a lot of information, and it's always it's the most important thing to create a good atmosphere for everybody. So I always think that this question is important. And then I would ask if materials or activities that I am using are appropriate, or if I need to change anything in my adapting process. Maybe our students are very young, or they don't have they are not mature enough to explain you what they need. So families can check different documents, different activities, and they can guide you about that accessibility, and if it's good or not, or if you have to change anything. But there is an even more important question in this case, which is the level of autonomy. Okay, so when we work with visually impaired students, we're going to see that the autonomy in asking questions, in movements, in orientating themselves might not be connected to the age they are. Okay, so it's important to ask the family what level of autonomy the student has, in order to know ourselves, in order to know what type of activities are good for this person, or what kind of task we can ask them to do. Okay, so remember that the level of autonomy is not always connected to the real age of the student, and it's a very important point to be discussed with families. Before we say goodbye and finish this session, I would like to remind you that you've got here different links in which I invite you to access. And you'll find information about how to work with visually impaired students and some other examples about this topic. You can also have the opportunity to play an accessible game, in which I hope you find, an example of practical activities. And well, just to remind you that we have 2 more other sessions in which we will talk in more details about adaptation, working with online resources, and working in physical classrooms with visually impaired students. So I hope we can see you in those sessions too.
Thank you. Credits and copyright. Copyright symbol British Council 2025. Copyright symbol once 2025. All rights reserved. This publication is for teacher training purposes only and not for commercial use. If you wish to reproduce, scan, transmit or use this publication or any part of it for another purpose, please contact the British Council for written permission. DPO Spain at britishcouncil.es